Edwin Samuelson, and welcome to the CineFiles. It's been a little while since we've been away. We've been away for a while, and we're returning here with a new special feature. We're going to do the Director Series. Today, we're going to be talking about one of our favorite directors, Sam Peckinpah. But before I begin, let me introduce my panel here. To my left, Eric Cohen, say hello. And to his left, Mike Foltz. Unfortunately, Jeff could not be here today, but he's with us in spirit. Anyway, guys, let's talk about Sam Peckinpah. Sam Peckinpah was I guess you could say one of the early Hollywood kids. I believe he was a son of a person in the movie business, and he got into the movie business himself. First, I believe, he was discovered by Ida Lupino, I believe, and she actually helped him out, and he actually, I believe, wrote the script for the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And
I don't know if he was the original Crazy Man director, but he definitely, when they made Peckinpah, he broke the mold, and everybody else was kind of, when they called him a Crazy Man director, they paled in comparison to this man.
And he's, what's funny is he's actually more famous. Was more famous back then, not for his movies, but his crazy wild life. I mean, he was parodied on Saturday Night Live, Monty Python, as you mentioned earlier.
He was insane.
He was crazy. I mean, there's a very famous story.
I don't know if he was so crazy as it seemed like demons were trailing him everywhere, and plus it seemed to me that he always had to pick fights, especially with the studio. And not saying that the studio were good guys anyway,
no.
But he had the drinking and he had the booze, the booze and the drug problem, and
he's also like a man's man.
Yeah.
It's a tradition of American directors.
He's a real tough guy.
Real tough guy.
I guess you could say the first real rebel director who just really went against the Hollywood system. I mean, he was totally against it. The only reason he was hired for so long is because his movies made money for a little while.
It's arguable that the MPAA system was developed because of him.
I definitely can agree with you on that.
Thanks to his Wild Bunch.
And what's so funny is his films look so tame today compared to what's out there. But he started it, and if it wasn't for him, we probably wouldn't have like you said, a rating system. We'd probably be in censorship still. Mm-hmm. But there's one of my favorite stories of Peckinpah is there's a very famous story where he's actually filming a personal project for him, a very big bomb at the time, Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. And there's a scene where people said he just went onto a field and he was just like looking around. It looked like he was scouting for mountains, and he was just out there for hours and hours. And people were just thinking, what is he doing? Is he really into this? And they found out he was trying to get down from the coke high he was on, before he go back to his filmmaking, because he was just so high on the set. And actually, if you want to see what Peckinpah was like as a person, Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia is an excellent place to start, because Warren Oates stated that he based his performance on Sam Peckinpah.
So let's talk about that film first.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one I want to start out with, because, I mean, I love that film because, as you can see, it's a very personal project, and it's just a very weird film. In fact, it was trashed. All the reviews, I was looking at some of the old reviews.
Well, it's one of those films that some people consider to be one of the worst films ever made, kind of.
It is on some of the worst lists.
But it's actually a really entertaining film.
And it's sick.
And say what you will about it.
I don't know. I don't understand how you can include it on one of the worst lists, because Warren Oates is fantastic. He's this world-weary guy that has to do this task or whatever and go about it, and it's very strange and everything, but I don't know how you could classify it as one of the worst. I mean, people should really pay attention to some of the crap that was maybe in the 80s.
Yeah, I think people kind of point to the weird, almost Virgin on camp scenes, where he's driving around in his car talking to the head, all that stuff.
And he's a real person. He's in a plastic bag, and you hear the flies buzzing around because he's found this head, which actually we should get into the plot a little bit about it. A woman who is a Mexican, plantation type owner's daughter is impregnated by a man named Alfredo Garcia, and he is so angry he offers $1 million for anyone who could produce his head. And Warren Oates hears about it, as he's a down and out piano player in Mexico, and he finds out about it, and he knows someone who actually knew Alfredo Garcia, and he goes to find him to take his head. So many, many weird things happen to him when he's in Mexico, in this this depressing land of, poor people, and he meets very unusual characters. In fact, Chris Christopherson, I believe in his first performance in a movie, he's really frightening as a would-be rapist, and one of the best scenes in the movie, actually. But Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia has many, many macabre scenes. Back then, I guess you could say talking to a head and having a conversation with it actually is kind of bizarre,
It's a very bizarre thing. It's hard for people to kind of...
But it wasn't that crazy, because years before, the Northwest Passage with Robert Young and Spencer Tracy, there was one of the soldiers that they brought along on the Northwest Passage went insane and had a decapitated Indian's head with him and was actually eating the heads.
About Alfredo Garcia, it did influence one of my favorite cult movies, Straight to Hell, by Alex Cox. I mean, although it's meant to be this sort of homage to like spaghetti westerns, the general conceit, the guys walk around in suits and ties and stuff. He took that from Alfredo Garcia.
That's a fascinating point that you bring up, because you know what? I guess you could say Alfredo Garcia is a Western.
It is a Western.
It is a Western, but in modern day, there's no cowboys and Indians, but I mean, you have the typical, not a typical story, a story of a man on the run trying to get his reward and people after him. And I guess you could say
You
it's
could
a
actually make an
Western
argument that 9/10 of Peckinpah's films are Westerns, just
Exactly.
in different, time periods. Let's please move on. We can't talk anymore about this.
Before we do that, I want to say one interesting thing. Like you were talking about how bad reviews of something. My friend showed me a list yesterday from Maximum Magazine of the worst films ever made. You would not believe it was #1 on the list. One of our favorite films, Big Trouble in Little China. So that shows you what's wrong with critics today and yesterday.
We should save that for another show later on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's talk about
Wild Bunch.
the quintessential Western of Peckinpah's, The Wild Bunch.
Exactly.
The
You
Wild
can't
Bunch.
Debate whether that's a Western or not, so we'll get right
Well, The Wild Bunch is definitely a Western, and actually it started, as you said, the MPA rating, because at the time it was known as one of the bloodiest films. Today, to me, it didn't offend me at all. In fact, people say Bonnie and Clyde was super violent. Maybe at the time it was very violent, but today, when you have movies like 300 and everything, it looks very tame. In fact, it could probably be on TV with very minor edits.
You know what's strange is when I first saw The Wild Bunch, I immediately thought it wasn't a Western. It reminded me of more of like a Civil War picture, almost like a Civil War era war picture, if that makes any sense, which it probably doesn't. And it didn't strike me as a Western. But then once you see it again, you're like, okay, this is a movie about the death of the Western.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with the Civil War, Mike. It takes place.
Well,
far
they
later than the
weren't they?
Civil War.
No, but weren't they all Civil War?
No.
What were they?
They were in the Army, but it takes place in the turn of the century.
Okay.
Because there's automobiles and stuff like old
Right.
and they're trying to rob a bank together, disguised as military men.
Okay, I thought they were Civil War.
That was interesting,
uniforms,
because
actually.
that's one time we actually see the actual Western dying.
Mm-hmm.
That era. I'm talking in terms of history, and the new one starting to creep in, and that gives it a very fascinating perspective in
It
my
had
book.
a great cast. I mean,
Wonderful
William
cast.
Holden was it was inspired casting in that part. Ernest Borgnine,
Robert Ryan was my favorite in there.
And you got like Warren Oates, L.Q. Jones.
Please refresh the memory on the story here.
Story's
The
great.
story is that these guys, were part of a gang that goes out robbing banks and all that stuff, and they had their last big heist, and they escape into Mexico. Robert Ryan, who is a member of that gang,
He becomes the bounty hunter.
He becomes a bounty hunter. They say either you go to jail or you help us get him. I mean,
Yeah.
that's basically it. So it becomes a chase between
And
Robert Ryan and William Holden.
Yeah,
and his
the battle of the
posse.
wits.
Right, and they wind up in the deepest Mexico, and they try to make a deal with the army there, and
That falls through
that falls through. And
with in a Peckinpah-like fashion. When we say falls through, imagine falling through with a hailstorm of bullets. But the
I mean, that's the
performance.
basic premise.
And once again, this is a theme that is very pervasive through all of Peckinpah's films. Is the sense that your main protagonist, if not the side characters, are also world weary. Everybody is tired of their lives, tired of the lives they're leading, tired of the way things are looking for the future, which is usually bleak for these characters. And the idea, especially Wild Bunch, is let's go out in a blaze of glory. Let's live life on our terms, whether it ends tomorrow or whatever. That's what we're going to be. That's what we're going to be seeing.
There's also an interesting, strong theme about loyalty in a film, too.
Yes.
Or the lack thereof. And even though Robert Ryan is going after William Holden,
Admires him.
he admires the shit out of him, and there's that sort of like eloquent suggestion at the end of the film where he kind of wishes he was there with them, that
Right.
last stand, and it's a great movie.
It was
one of the best.
to me. The showy part was William Holden. That's why he had the lead. But to me, it was Robert Ryan. I absolutely adored his performance because it was
Robert
so
Ryan
quiet
was
and
one of these
beautiful.
fascinating actors where he could go either way. He was either convincing hero or he was convincing villain. He's just like one of these guys that could just do both, but yet still be the same guy.
The thing I like about it too is he took a lot of classic Western themes and put them all together into just a great piece. I mean, everything, like you talk about the loyalty, And the thing too is, like you saying, they're going out for their last hurrah. And the thing too is that the Western era is dying, so they don't have much time left because things are changing in that world.
Very interesting Western that Peckinpah did during that time, Major Dundee.
Now that one is in the Civil War.
Well, that's post Civil War. That they're going around now. They're transporting some Confederate prisoners.
And once again, they're having trouble with Mexicans.
With Mexicans, right.
And I want to mention recently, the Major Dundee has finally been re-released within the last year or so, and it was actually restored somewhat to Sam Peckinpah's, close to his original cut as possible. Some of the footage was not filmed, but he had a falling out of the studio, so it was released in a cut that he was not too happy with, and it was just reassembled.
It's a flawed movie, but it has some very interesting things going on. And the relationship between Richard Harris and Charlton Heston's character, obviously they've had a history before this war and whatever happened. They must have been friends at one time. Richard Harris is probably the more sympathetic of the two. There's that whole sequence where Charlton Heston is just like, injured and he's washed up and they're trying to take care of him, and Richard Harris takes it upon himself to go in and save him even though he's his prisoner, and that's a very interesting relationship. I'd be interested to see like a whole movie about Richard Harris's character, but there's a lot of problems with the films. There's a lot of stretches, a lot of ideas that aren't fully fleshed out.
The additional footage to me did not matter. It didn't seem to
I
strike
agree.
me as one of those just changing points where you see a film and like, oh, that's what he was trying to say. The restored footage was not.
So you
that
wouldn't
much.
compare it to like where they just recently restored the big red one with the Sam Fuller film,
No,
and it was like amazing, a new film completely. This one did take
No,
away.
it didn't really.
Didn't help it, or
really.
didn't
In fact,
bother
it probably made it more boring.
Yeah, well,
in a lot of ways,
the Spy, it kind of stopped the momentum that the film had. One thing I will give the film is I absolutely love Charlton Heston in that era. He is amazing. As hammy as he is, he's still very
anyone?
He's very charismatic, though. Very charismatic. What actor these days can get away with being so unselfconsciously hammy and still convince the audience that this guy's doing his job? And a lot of people can't do that. Maybe Russell Crowe, maybe.
Well, I'm going to go on record. I mean, I don't agree with his political beliefs at all, but I mean, Charlton Heston was some of my favorite films of all time, from Planet of the Apes to The Omega Man. He's done some really interesting films.
Soylent Green.
Touch of Evil, yeah, Soylent Green.
Touch of Evil, fantastic.
Great movie.
Another film restored recently. But let's go on to a film. Actually, let's go on to another film. A film of his is actually probably his most financially successful, which is The Getaway. That is actually, believe it or not, more successful than The Wild Bunch. It did very well. Some people say it's a junk food movie. A lot of people, like myself, hail it as a new era and a new type of crime film. Actually, we were talking earlier about Wild Bunch and how, as you could see a lot of the themes that are in The Wild Bunch in The Getaway, with a person, on the run, trying to get away, trying to go to Mexico to get away, and with his reward, and he's, on the run from killers, another one, and a double cross too. Let's start out with you, Mike. The Getaway has Steve McQueen and Ali MacGraw as a...
I think that's one of the reasons why it was so successful, is because Steve McQueen and Ali MacGraw were they were like Hollywood royalty. When Ali MacGraw had left Robert Evans to be with Steve McQueen, this was tabloid fodder for months and months and months, if not for years. Mm-hmm. And to have and they had this kind of electric chemistry. If you're a Peckinpah fan out there, I am gonna drop a little bit of blasphemy here. I actually thought the remake of The Getaway was better. I thought it was better than the original.
I don't go there, but I liked it.
But the one thing that I do like about the original Getaway that you don't see, a friend of mine brought this up a long time ago, and I agree with him 100%. You don't see this anymore, where McQueen just gets sick of Ali MacGraw and kicks the crap out of her, just starts slapping her right and left, and you just don't see that.
He's anti-homosexual. He's pro-white.
Yeah, you just
and he doesn't like
see that. You don't see that in films anymore. It was very, very interesting. And
you're so unpolitically correct. I love it.
I like in the new one. I love Michael Madsen's Rudy a lot better than the old Rudy, who was like just a nondescript.
Al Voltaire, who was in Godfather.
I didn't think he was that I don't know if I totally agree with that.
And then you had Sally
I have
Struthers.
to re-see the remake again. I thought the remake was good and was quality filmmaking, but it pretty much hit all the notes it's supposed to make. I thought that Getaway had some more interesting, subtle things, like the whole side story with Sally Struthers and the breakdown of her marriage because
That's
it's
terrific.
like how the
The
guy
bet.
comes. Yeah. And I just thought that was so interesting.
It's so dark. I mean, you
Yeah.
see a guy, they're just like, the guy's having sex with the wife and she's enjoying it.
The
and
guy's
he's just
completely
depressed and wants to kill himself.
completely cuckolded.
I mean, there's great scenes where he's throwing chicken legs at him and just harassing him and torturing him. It's just so hard to watch, but it's really well done. And there's a scene, my favorite scene in the movie, which is great, is there's a scene where they're trapped in a garbage truck and they're trying to get out. Terrific editing. And the best thing is the finale, which is in a hotel. Some of the best editing you'll ever see in a movie. And in fact, there's a great scene. I don't know if it's at the conclusion, but there's a scene where you see Ally McGraw driving a car, and she almost runs over Steve McQueen, and that actually happened on the set. And he even looks at her like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And they left that in the movie, which I thought was very clever.
Well, in the remake, once again I apologize to all you
I like
Peckinpah
it.
people. I love that they had the nice little cameo at the end with Richard Farnsworth, who I love watching. Anytime Richard Farnsworth shows up, I just love.
And don't
seeing
forget
this
who
man.
else is in it. One of your favorite character actors working today, which people don't even realize he's in it. He plays one of the bank robbers, which is Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he's very bad in that.
David
actually.
Morse, he's in there. James Woods.
James Woods is actually a very good character there in that movie. I forgot the name of his character, but Ben Johnson plays him in the original.
Right.
Very good movie. Check them both out. They were actually both written by Walter Hill, who went on to direct The Warriors and many other great films.
Yes.
Now when we talked about famous couples, going at it, then let's talk about another famous couples in trouble. Let's go with the Straw Dogs, because then you got talk about being cuckolded. You've got
Yes.
Dustin Hoffman and Susan George.
I'll go on record, that is my favorite Peckinpah film. In fact, the film is one of the most controversial films ever made. In fact, it was banned in England for over 20-something years, and because of its controversial, depiction of English people. Not Charlton Heston, forgive me. Dustin Hoffman plays a mathematician who moves with his British wife to a village in, I guess say a really rough,
A very rural section of
a
outside
very
of
strange
London.
looking, but still somehow hot Susan George. Was that her name?
Yeah, Susan George, who went on
I
to
guess-
Susan George, who went on to star in Mandingo.
Yeah.
Susan George was a very strange looking woman. She looked like a chipmunk. She had
she's
like
very
the
beautiful.
chubby
strange look,
cheeks.
but somehow she was just so hot.
I don't know.
I thought she was beautiful. But Dustin Hoffman plays a mathematician, very intellectual guy, who's a pacifist who moves into a village where there's a lot of tough, rough, and touty people. And
Kind of like Cockney guys.
Cockney guys, yeah, they are always at the pub, and they don't like
Very-
him because he's the Yank. And
Well, it's just a local ruse,
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like,
but she also had a reputation. She was originally from that village.
and she went on to do something with her, and they were saying like, "Hey, you fancied me" or whatever. And there's a scene where it's just a heartbreaking scene where she's attacked, and Dustin Hoffman, doesn't know how to respond, which I think is a really good performance. He really toned it down. In fact, Susan George said that he was so mean to her throughout the entire movie because he's so angry at her inside, and I thought that was really interesting, that way that they portrayed that.
It's one of Dustin Hoffman's finest performances.
Definitely.
It actually put his performance in Rain Man to shame.
I agree with you on that. And in fact, the ending, which actually I think is interesting, is that he's not actually trying to go after these guys like Ella Rambo. He's trying to defend himself from people breaking into his house to take a person he's sheltering, because he's like, I am not going to allow them to do this. I am not going to allow them to do this. And it's a phenomenal siege movie.
You could make a case that it's a wonderful
which
siege
is an
film.
interesting point to make, because one of the criticisms originally leveled at the film is that it was this pro-fascist, pro-violence stance, because they try to make this character who's all about peace and intellectualism. Finally, he realizes he has to resort to
violence
this.
is the answer.
But what totally makes that argument moot is that, again, he's not on the attack; he's on the defense.
On the defense, he's like, leave.
Which is a very important point to make about
And
this
he
film.
never actually goes after anyone. They all come after him. There's a terrific scene, which to this day, it's one of the best scenes I've seen in a movie, is where he uses a bear trap to defend himself from these people, and it's just phenomenal. I mean,
You never ever get the feeling that Dustin Hoffman is bloodthirsty in the film. You never get that.
and I like too is they don't make him this Rambo character. I was saying, like this guy who's like super, like who can beat up the shit out of anybody.
Well, if they
He's
if
using
they
his brains.
remade that today, obviously the guy would, he would become a Rambo character.
Yeah, he become a Rambo muscular character who's like, "Who, you want to fuck with me?" This guy is like, he's using his
I don't know if he
brains
used
to
that
outsmart
voice,
these
but-
people.
Actually, the closest we've had to a modern version of that is the character in the remake of Hills Have Eyes. Hills Have Eyes. The intellectual
the
young
Nebbish
father
who
guy
becomes
who winds up
the
having to know
revenger.
how to use the gun, and that's sort of in the same kind of vein. But no, Straw Dogs is a great movie.
And
Let's move on,
That's actually
please.
another film, by the way, who's just been restored. The rape scene was cut out of all the prints until recently, and it was released by Criterion in a nice special edition, which is now out of print. So if you see it, go grab it. It has an awesome documentary on Peckinpah.
And I'll say this: thank you to Criterion for restoring the rape.
Well, hey, it's an important part of the movie.
Yep.
So he's grateful for the rape.
What's
He
wrong with
misses
you?
the
Wife
fact that we don't
beating.
beat women. He's anti-homosexual.
Him and Peckinpah would have a beer together and have a good time.
Beer and some Quaaludes.
All right, well, let's go on to another film here. And this is a very weird film from Peckinpah. In fact, I would go on to say it's probably one of the weirdest in his canon. Not the weirdest, but definitely up there, which is The Killer Elite, which stars Robert Duvall and James Caan as a pair of CIA agents, one of who double crosses the other. And it's merged with the martial arts genre. And,
I always tell people out there, you know, every director who... It's Sam Peckinpah's closest film to a superhero film. It's his superhero film.
I'd say it's his comic book film because it's just so over the top and ludicrous. It's entertaining, don't get me wrong, because even Peckinpah can make a good entertaining bad film.
It starts out very strange. It starts out almost like a John Cassavetes type film, very improv. You get this feeling that Caan and Duvall are just having a good time. They're improving. Peckinpah must have been behind the camera going, guys, do whatever you want. Have a singing contest. Talk about your wives and girlfriends, what you're going to be doing that weekend, what vacation you're going to. Do whatever you want. And then you could tell that as the film goes on, which is funny because you're developing James Caan into this martial arts master, and he's got his cane/billy club that he relies on after his knee injuries get rehabbed. But you can tell that the story gets more and more stupid as it gets towards the ending.
It's obvious he was, because they said he was very high on drugs at this time, and it's obvious he was probably sober near the beginning and got worse and worse as he went along because there's a lot of scenes that don't cut together, and it's obvious there was a lot of script doctors come in, not script doctors, editors, you know, I guess say film doctors, these editors who come in and try to save a film, and it's entertaining, but if you're looking for logic, look elsewhere.
It's a very strange
Well,
film.
I
uneven.
have not seen this movie.
Well, I will give it to you to watch. Now, I want to talk about the last really good film that Peckinpah made. I know, Mike, you haven't seen all of it, but Eric has.
No, I've seen all of it, but it was when I was like 12.
Cross of Iron, which is one of
No,
my...
I haven't seen all of it.
Cross of Iron is, I guess, Sam Peckinpah's only war film, and you think that he would have gone on to do some other war films, you know, because the man is a man of, you know, very violent means. This one is very interesting in that it takes place from the German perspective with James Coburn and
Maximilian Schell.
Maximilian Schell.
I haven't seen it all the way through. I've always like picked it up at certain points. I need to sit down and watch the whole thing from beginning to end. But
it's
from what I've seen,
definitely
it looks
one of his most underrated films, and it's the last really good film he would make.
I found it boring.
I'm very surprised that you say
I
that.
could not get through it. I had a very, very tough time getting through it.
Was this recently or a long time ago? When
Maybe about 5 years ago.
Okay, so that's recent.
Well, I will definitely give it to you guys because I'd like you guys to take a look at it again and see a nice print of it because it's got some really disturbing stuff. I mean, there's a scene where these soldiers are like, they're kind of like Ronin soldiers, you know, they're going around and these women take them in and they're like, oh, well, you know, thank you, whatever. And then they start to sleep with them, you know, and have a good time. And then one of them castrates one of them. And you find out that they're against
Castrates one of the women?
No, one of them, the men.
Oh, okay.
She castrates him, and it's like, oh my God, you know. And then like you find out that they're trying to kill them because you know they're actually the enemy's women that are
It's
planted.
like the Lizzies and the Warriors. A film that's not boring at all is Convoy. Convoy is one of the strangest films you will ever see because it is, the studio must have just thrown a bunch of money at Peckinpah and said, Smokey and the Bandit, huge hit. Make your Smokey and the Bandit. And let me tell you something. It's about a convoy of trucks who think that the trucker does not want to stop, and it's like protesting the government. And you've got Ernest Borgnine basically playing Jackie Gleason and Chris Christopherson, and Ali McGraw comes back. It's a Convoy, it's 70s cheese at its finest.
Something you forgot to mention, ironically, is that it's based on the very famous R.D. McCall song, and he's actually in the movie. And this is, I think, one of the first instances actually of a movie being based on a song.
Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of
And not a good song either.
One thing about Convoy 2 I want to mention is that Sam Peckinpah was so high during the entire making of the film, they said that James Coburn actually directed it for him. And I wouldn't be surprised because it does not feel like a Peckinpah film at all.
Speaking of James Coburn, there's a wonderful Western that Peckinpah did, one of the many, and that's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, with Billy the Kid played by Chris Christopherson and James Coburn playing Pat Garrett, the man that's going to hunt him down.
And that's another film that was actually destroyed by the studio and then recut, and then recently a director's cut of that was released as well. About 10 years ago.
Wonderful Western.
With a huge hit by Bob Dylan, which is one of the biggest, Knocking on Heaven's Door.
And he stars in the film.
Yes,
we need to see it again.
After years of failing health because of drug use, this was a very troubled production, like many for Peckinpah. In fact, he had a pacemaker at the time, and he died not shortly after completing it. And of course, he was kicked out of the editing room, so it was never really finished with his approval. It was finished by the producers, who went on to produce Highlander, actually. Also, that same year, I guess you'd say his I guess you could say his Robert De Niro, as you know, Scorsese has De Niro, and Peckinpah had his De Niro, which was Warren Oates, died. So they both died within the same year, and it's very sad. And the last film was The Austrian Weekend, which was based on a Robert Ludlum thriller, which is it's very, it feels most like a TV film, actually. I mean, it just doesn't have the style of Peckinpah. It's a very basic, it's just an overly complicated plot for no reason.
It's also kind of typical of films of that part of the 80s that were coming out.
Very glossy.
Kind of a glossy, sort of action-oriented, but like sort of similar, either like revenge type films, or there was a sort of like mini genre of sort of like spies or assassins, or you know. And
it felt like a Tom Clancy movie before Tom Clancy films got made. That's how I feel about it.
I don't even say it's like a Tom Clancy film. It's like just this really weird kind of, you know, the whole premise is that these group of friends get together. One of the friends is taken aside and told, you know, some of your friends are spies.
House, it's kind of like a reality show, actually, when you think about it. And he's trying to get these people to confess that they're spies. And something's amiss during this whole thing. There's a lot of espionage in it. The way it unravels is weird. It's just too complicated.
Craig T. Nelson is in it.
Craig T. Nelson, Dennis Hopper. I mean, it's got a great cast.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't. There's even more people, but I can't remember right now.
No, what's his name? Hurt.
John Hurt, yes, who plays the CIA agent, and you find out later on he has his own ulterior motives for doing this. And it's actually, that's an interesting point about the movie, but the movie itself, not very good. It's worth a look, you know. The DVD is more interesting than the film itself because the DVD actually has a very rough print cut of his original work print, which is in crap quality. Has some scenes that are not in the movie, and also there's a fascinating documentary on the making of the film and Peckinpah and remembrances by some of his actors. That's even more interesting than the film itself. Definitely check that out. But let's before I go, my last question, you guys. What would be your favorite Peckinpah film, real quick? What would be your favorite, Mike?
Wild Bunch.
Wild Bunch?
Wild Bunch.
Mine would be Straw Dogs, and his most underrated one would be Cross of Iron. Or actually, I take that back. Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, because that was massacred by the press. Anyway, that will bring this show to a close. We hope that you'll visit us on the web, and we hope to hear from you. And until next week, thank you. But what do you think about what's your least favorite Peckinpah? Do you have a least favorite?
I don't have a least favorite. Well, maybe Ride the High Country.
Cross of Iron, only because I was so bored with it I couldn't get through it.
Or maybe I should say Austrian Weekend. That's like
really. I would say Convoy. I mean, it's just.
But I haven't seen Convoy.
Oh,
Convoy is just so damn silly, though.